Chapter 1. Beneath the Surface. There is a layer of reality that most never learn to see. Not because it's hidden, but because it's ignored, overlooked, dismissed by a culture that rewards surface more than substance, convenience more than comprehension. But underneath the noise, beneath the words, beneath the postures and smiles and flawless digital performances, there is a current, a silent pull, a truth more ancient than speech itself, human nature. And it governs everything. It doesn't matter where you were born, how educated you are, how much money you make, or how many people call your name in a crowd. Beneath your ambition, your identity, your intention, there is instinct. There are patterns. Deep, invisible programs etched into your biology and passed through generations that shape how you respond to power, to pain, to love, to fear. You think you're in control, but until you understand the machinery running behind your eyes, you're just a passenger. And the worst part is, you'll never even know it. Most people move through life reacting to tone, to facial expressions, to stories, to invisible social scripts written by people who died centuries ago. And they think they're being rational, logical, objective. But the truth is, most people aren't thinking. They're feeling and then justifying. They're sensing instinctively where they fit in the hierarchy, who's higher, who's lower, who's safe to follow, who's dangerous to defy, and all of it happens before a single conscious thought is formed. You want to understand people? You want to understand yourself? Then stop listening to what they say. Watch what they do. Because behavior never lies. Take a room full of strangers. You don't need introductions to know who the leader is. You feel it. Their posture. Their presence. Their stillness. They don't seek attention. The room orbits them. Not because they're better, but because they're in alignment with something most people have never even named. Confidence? Not quite. Charisma? Close but no. What you're seeing is congruence. Their inner world and outer world are not at war. Their expression is clear, direct, unfiltered by the need to be liked. And in a world built on performance, that kind of authenticity is mistaken for dominance. But it's not dominance, it's truth. And truth, when embodied, is magnetic. You want to influence people? Don't start with words. Start with self. Start by understanding the machinery, yours and theirs. Understand that humans are tribal by nature. That we evolved to survive by scanning for threats, allies, opportunities. That we are biologically wired to mimic those we want approval from and avoid confrontation with those who hold power over us. Understand that most behavior is not about reason, it's about status. And that every conversation, every gesture, every silence carries a signal. Who am I in this dynamic? Where do I stand? And if you're unaware of this silent negotiation, then you're not shaping the moment. The moment is shaping you. Look at the greats. Lincoln didn't win people by shouting. He read people. He studied them. He understood their needs, their fears, their hidden drives, and then he spoke directly to those places. Edison didn't just invent. He observed. He failed over 10,000 times not because he was obsessed with technology, but because he understood that human progress moves through resistance, and the ones who shape the world are the ones who understand that failure is not personal, it's mechanical. You want to influence others? Learn first how they're built. Learn what drives them when no one is watching. Learn what wounds they carry and what illusions they protect. Learn that people don't want the truth, they want to feel safe. And they will rewrite reality to protect that feeling, even if it means lying to themselves. They will sabotage progress to preserve familiarity. They will push away the very thing they need most if it threatens the identity they've clung to for survival. Because survival, not logic, is the engine of human behavior. Every trait, every tick, every unconscious expression you've learned to ignore, they're signals. The furrowed brow when you ask a question. The subtle shift in posture when someone disagrees. The quiet pause before a laugh. These are not meaningless. These are maps, clues that reveal what someone is hiding, what they need, what they're afraid to admit. And once you learn to read those maps, you stop reacting and start understanding. You stop taking things personally because you realize that people aren't rejecting you, they're rejecting the discomfort you bring to their illusion. You stop trying to please everyone, because you know that influence isn't about agreement, it's about relevance. And relevance only comes when you stop performing and start perceiving. Because perception is power. And in the game of human nature, the ones who win are not the loudest, they're the most attuned. And attunement isn't gifted. It's earned. It's earned through silence, through observation, through discomfort, through paying attention when everyone else is distracted, through listening not just to words, but to patterns, through watching how people respond to pressure, to rejection, to power, to vulnerability. Because who someone is under pressure is who they really are. You want to understand why people do what they do? Watch how they act when they think no one's watching. Watch how they treat the people they don't need. Watch how they speak about others behind their back. Watch how they respond to someone else's success, with celebration or silent envy. These moments are not accidents. They're windows into the real architecture of the psyche. And if you want to become a master of influence, not manipulation, not performance, but real influence, then you must build the skill that no one teaches and few ever master: emotional perception. The ability to sense what's being unsaid, to name what others are afraid to admit, to hold your center while others project their chaos, to respond not to the noise, but to the signal beneath the noise. That's what separates leaders from performers. Leaders understand human nature and work with it. Performers ignore it and try to control it. One builds trust. The other exhausts everyone around them. And this is where the journey begins. Not with tactics, not with charm, but with vision. The vision to see what others overlook. The patience to understand before being understood. The humility to study your own nature before trying to shape someone else's. Because before you can lead, before you can connect, before you can truly move people, you must learn to see. And most people are blind. Chapter 2: The Mirror of Mindset. Most people think the mind is a tool, a sharp blade that they wield with logic and intention, but what they fail to see is that the mind is not a servant unless it is trained. Otherwise, it becomes a master that distorts reality in ways so subtle and so constant that they never even realize they're no longer seeing the world, but only their fear reflected back at them. Mindset isn't something you practice when it's convenient. It's the invisible filter that shapes every thought, every interpretation, every emotional trigger and reaction you experience. It's not something you change once. It's something you become. And most of what people call reality is nothing more than mindset projected onto a world that has no obligation to obey your narrative. You walk into a room and you think people are judging you, but what if they're admiring you and just too intimidated to show it? You interpret a delay in response as rejection, but what if the person is just drowning in their own chaos? You assume someone's cold tone means they don't like you, but what if they're operating from trauma that predates your existence? The problem isn't always the world. The problem is that you're listening to a voice in your head that has been programmed by years of unchallenged experiences, unconscious beliefs, and defensive habits meant to keep you safe but now quietly keep you small. And this is where people get stuck, over and over. They try to change their behavior without addressing the mind that fuels it. They try to improve their communication without dismantling the beliefs that whisper, "You're not enough." They try to lead without confronting the voice that says, "Who are you to be powerful?" And so their growth becomes cosmetic. Their efforts turn mechanical. They appear confident, but it's hollow. They speak with charm, but not conviction. Because no technique can override a broken internal narrative. You cannot lead people out there if you cannot lead the chaos in here. Mindset is not about thinking positive. It's about thinking clearly. It's about stripping away the distortions, the assumptions, the inherited insecurities, the generational wounds, the identity traps, until what remains is a mind that doesn't overreact, doesn't self-destruct, doesn't sabotage. A mind that serves the mission. A mind that sees with precision. And precision is what separates power from noise. It's what allows you to say one sentence and have it change the temperature in a room, not because you're loud, but because your mind is aligned. Not cluttered with doubt, not fogged with the need for approval, not divided between truth and performance, but focused, calibrated, centered. And you can feel it when someone has this. It's in the way they move, the way they listen, The way they respond to tension, not with panic, but with patience. The way they don't chase attention because they understand that true influence starts with internal authority. That's the real mindset shift. You stop looking for control, and you start cultivating command, not over others, but over yourself, over your state, over your tone, over the choices you make when no one's watching, over the energy you bring into every interaction. And that command isn't something you inherit. It's something you build, brick by brick, thought by thought. Every time you catch yourself reacting and choose reflection instead. Every time you notice the fear and lean in instead of running. Every time you rewrite the narrative in your head before it becomes a behavior. That's how real mindset is forged, in private, in silence, in the moments that don't make highlight reels but shape everything that eventually does. Because the mind doesn't care about your goals. It cares about your patterns. If your patterns are built on fear, your mind will always find a way to protect you from discomfort, even if that means blocking your growth. But when your patterns are built on awareness, the same discomfort becomes data. Pain becomes feedback. Rejection becomes redirection. You begin to see yourself not as a victim of emotion, but as an observer of it. You stop being trapped in stories and start becoming the author. And suddenly, people feel the difference, not in what you say but in how you exist. Your mindset starts to radiate in your decisions, in your posture, in the way you hold space when others collapse. It's not visible, but it's unmistakable. Now understand this, mindset is contagious. You walk into a room with a grounded, focused, calm internal state, and others adapt to it. You bring clarity into a meeting, and confusion begins to dissolve. You walk through adversity with steadiness, and it gives others permission to access strength they didn't even know they had. But the reverse is also true. You bring anxiety, people feel it. You carry resentment, it leaks. You carry self-doubt, it sabotages your influence before your first word. That's why mindset isn't just personal development. It's leadership. It's service. It's how you protect the emotional environment of every space you enter. And to build that kind of mindset, you must get ruthless with your inputs. You must question everything you've allowed into your head, every belief you inherited, every narrative you absorbed from culture, every identity you crafted to survive high school or earn your parents' validation. You must dismantle the mental architecture that kept you safe at one level but now prevents you from rising. Because the mind is a builder. It will construct a world around whatever blueprints you give it. And if those blueprints are broken, based on fear, based on shame, based on avoidance, your life will reflect it. So ask yourself honestly, is your mindset built for survival or expansion? Are your thoughts weapons that protect your limits or tools that stretch your future? When you look in the mirror, do you see someone moving with intention or someone negotiating with self-doubt? When the pressure hits, do you shrink back into old thinking or rise into clarity? Because until your mind matches your mission, you will always feel like an imposter in your own life. And when it does, when your thoughts finally align with your identity, your actions with your purpose, your patterns with your power, everything changes. Not overnight, not instantly, but undeniably. Conversations feel different. Rooms feel different. Resistance no longer shakes you, because your mindset is not built on temporary feelings, but on permanent choice. You chose who you would become, and you reinforce it daily. That is the foundation. That is the first battle. That is where all human behavior begins, not in circumstance, not in education, not in personality, but in mindset. Until that is right, nothing else will last. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Belief. There is no force more quietly powerful than belief. Not belief in the abstract sense, not religion, not philosophy, not cultural traditions, but the kind of belief that governs your moment-to-moment identity, the kind that sits beneath the surface of every decision, every reaction, every relationship, every word that escapes your lips. Belief is the silent architect of your reality. It builds the walls you cannot see, the ceilings you stop growing beyond, the doors you don't even know you've locked from the inside. Most people walk through life unaware that their greatest limitations are not external, not the economy, not their job, not their past, but internal assumptions about what they're allowed to be, to want, to say, to become. And the most dangerous thing about belief is that once it is installed, it disappears. It doesn't keep asking for your attention. It becomes part of the operating system. You assume it's truth, when in fact, it's often a collection of incomplete ideas, inherited fears, generational trauma, or social programming dressed up as certainty. Belief rarely begins as your own. It's absorbed from parents, from school, from the stories we heard growing up about who we are, what we can achieve, and where we belong. And because it's familiar, we stop questioning it. But familiarity is not truth. It's just repetition. And repetition, when left unchallenged, becomes identity. The human mind is designed for efficiency, not accuracy. It wants to build a model of the world that feels predictable, safe, manageable, and once that model is in place, it will defend it, often violently, even if it's wrong. That's why people stay in relationships that destroy them. That's why they cling to careers they hate. That's why they resist feedback that could liberate them. Because on a deep, unspoken level, they have fused their self with a set of beliefs that no longer serve them. And letting go of those beliefs feels like death. Not metaphorical death, psychological death. Because the ego does not distinguish between who you are and what you've believed for years. So when you challenge your beliefs, your ego panics. But your evolution depends on it. Think of Edison. He wasn't successful because he had better tools or more resources. He simply believed in an outcome that didn't yet exist. He believed it so deeply that the repeated failures didn't register as defeat, only data. Think of Ford. When people said, "We want faster horses," he believed in an entirely different reality, one they couldn't even imagine. His belief wasn't just bold, it was unreasonable. And that's the point. Because belief, when calibrated correctly, allows you to build beyond logic, beyond consensus, beyond what is statistically likely. It doesn't ignore reality. It reshapes it. And every major invention, every revolution, every breakthrough in science or art or society was first powered not by skill, but by belief. Now look inward. Look at your own patterns. What do you believe about yourself when no one's watching? What do you believe about how the world sees you, how people treat you, what you deserve, what you're capable of, what kind of love you're allowed to receive, what kind of life you're allowed to live? Don't answer with your intellect. Don't quote your affirmations. Watch your behavior. Because behavior is the evidence of belief. You can tell yourself you're confident, but if you shrink in rooms where you feel outmatched, the belief is not there. You can tell yourself you're worthy of respect, but if you tolerate condescension in silence, the belief is not real. The mind can lie. The body cannot. That's why most change doesn't last. Because it's cosmetic. People try to change behavior without changing belief, and it always collapses under pressure. They set goals from a place of excitement, but the identity underneath those goals hasn't shifted. They try to speak boldly, but their nervous system is still calibrated to fear rejection. They try to lead, but they still believe, deep down, that someone else knows better. So the question becomes, how do you change belief? You start by breaking the illusion that your beliefs are facts. They are not. They are choices. Repeated, reinforced, emotionally charged choices. And what can be built can be rebuilt. What can be reinforced can be replaced. You begin with awareness. You track your triggers. You observe your thoughts like a scientist, not a judge. You notice the patterns, where you hesitate, where you shrink, where you overcompensate, where you lie, where you pretend. And then you ask, what would I have to believe for this behavior to feel necessary? That's where the work begins. Not in trying harder, but in believing differently. You begin to install new beliefs not through wishful thinking, but through deliberate repetition and evidence. You collect wins, no matter how small. You speak even when your voice shakes. You show up even when you're scared. You follow through on promises to yourself, even when no one else sees. And every time you do, you're not just acting, you're training. You're proving to your mind that a new reality is possible. And if you do it long enough, the old belief begins to crack. Doubt creeps into your limitations. And that doubt, ironically, is the beginning of freedom. Belief doesn't change in a moment. It changes in motion. You become someone new not by waiting for confidence, but by moving before it arrives. By choosing to act like the person you want to be, not once, but relentlessly. Until one day, without even trying, you realize you no longer have to pretend. You've become. This is the hidden law. People don't do what's logical, they do what their beliefs allow. And if you want to change what people do, including yourself, don't start with rules. Start with the beliefs those rules are built on. Everything else is temporary. Chapter 4: Clarity in the Age of Noise. There is a kind of silence that doesn't come from stillness. It comes from knowing. A calm that doesn't need to be loud because it's already anchored. A presence that doesn't chase attention because it radiates direction. This is the power of clarity, not the superficial clarity of short-term goals or clean calendars, but the rare and dangerous clarity that arises when a human being becomes completely aligned with their identity, their direction, their principles, and their internal compass, regardless of who's watching, regardless of who agrees. And in a world where everyone is busy reacting, performing, and projecting, the one who moves with clarity becomes the one who others naturally follow. Most people don't lack intelligence. They don't lack ambition. They don't lack talent. They lack clarity. They don't know what they're building. They don't know what they stand for. They don't know which voice in their mind is their own and which was installed by someone else, by culture, by upbringing, by fear masquerading as caution. And so they drift. They consume. They mimic. They follow paths that were never designed for them. They chase success by copying blueprints that belong to other people. They wonder why their progress feels empty, why their energy is scattered, why their relationships lack depth. And the answer is always the same. They're living in reaction to life instead of moving in response to clarity. You can't create meaning if you're unclear on who you are. You can't build trust if your words are disconnected from your values. You can't lead people if you're still trying to figure out where you're going. Clarity is the prerequisite for power, not the aggressive, performative kind of power that dominates with force, but the quiet, immovable kind of power that commands without demanding. You feel it in people who have clarity. They speak less, but their words land. They don't rush to fill the space because they're not afraid of silence. They don't try to prove anything because they're not at war with doubt. Their clarity clears the air. It gives others permission to let down their masks. Because when one person shows up whole, it challenges everyone else to do the same. But clarity is not convenient. It doesn't arrive in the moments of comfort. It is forged in solitude, in silence, in deep reflection. It comes from facing the questions most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Who am I when I stop performing? What do I actually want, not what I've been told to want? What am I willing to sacrifice for? Where am I still hiding behind busyness, behind roles, behind polished distractions? Clarity requires confrontation, with your past, with your pain, with your pretenses. And that's why most avoid it. Because it's easier to be productive than it is to be honest. But until you are honest with yourself, every layer of your life will be distorted. Your goals will be misaligned. Your relationships will be performative. Your communication will feel hollow. Because no matter how sharp your strategies are, if your direction is unclear, you are simply moving faster toward a life that doesn't belong to you. That is the great tragedy of high performers without self-awareness. They build brilliantly, but blindly. They reach the peak of their ladder only to find it was leaning against the wrong wall. Clarity gives you back your life. It stops the drift. It sharpens the lens. It allows you to move through the world with a kind of internal conviction that cannot be faked. You no longer need to be the loudest in the room. Your certainty does the talking. You no longer wait for external validation. Your alignment becomes its own reward. You become dangerous, not because you threaten others, but because you can no longer be manipulated by confusion. You are not pulled by trends, not shaken by feedback, not addicted to the approval that once dictated your every move. Clarity is freedom. And it is rare. Because it takes courage. Not the kind of courage that shows up on stages or in battles, but the internal courage to pause, to reflect, to strip away the noise and admit where you've been faking it. The courage to let go of what you've outgrown, even if it once made you feel safe. The courage to stop chasing momentum and start building meaning. Because when you know who you are, when you know what matters, when you know why you've chosen this path, You become unstoppable. Not because the path is easy, but because it is yours. And people feel that. They feel when you're no longer chasing, but choosing. They feel when your actions are not desperate, but deliberate. They feel when your life is no longer a reaction, but a response to something deeper than circumstance. That's why clarity precedes influence. That's why clarity precedes peace. That's why clarity precedes everything. Because once you know where you're going, every decision becomes easier. Not painless, but clear. You can say no without guilt. You can walk away without regret. You can stand still in chaos and still move forward, because you're not chasing comfort, you're obeying vision. So if you feel lost, don't chase more information. Don't distract yourself with activity. Don't drown yourself in noise. Sit with the questions you've avoided. Get radically honest about your motives, your wounds, your patterns. Face the mirrors you've been avoiding. Because clarity is not found, it is earned. Through reflection. Through discomfort. Through silence. Through ruthless self-awareness. And once you earn it, once you reclaim it, everything you touch becomes more powerful. Your words, your relationships, your mission, your very presence. Clarity is the foundation. Without it, you build in sand. With it, you become unshakable. Chapter 5. The Compass of Purpose. At some point in your life, and for most, it happens quietly, without warning, in a moment no one else will notice, you will come face to face with the question that changes everything. What am I actually doing this for? Not the surface answers. Not the polished reasons you tell people in interviews or sprinkle on top of Instagram captions. But the real answer. The one that burns under your skin when you're alone. The one that reveals whether you're building something worth suffering for or whether you're just stacking bricks out of habit. Because until you can answer that question with terrifying clarity, everything you build is at risk. Your goals, your relationships, your discipline, your identity. Because if you don't know your why, your what becomes fragile. Purpose isn't a concept. It's not a mission statement you paste onto your vision board or a feel-good idea you recite when life is easy. Purpose is the anchor, the thing that holds when the winds of failure rip through your plans, when the applause fades, when the metrics fall short, when you find yourself halfway up a mountain you no longer recognize and have to ask yourself whether the climb is still worth it. Purpose is what keeps your feet moving when motivation dies. Because motivation will die. Purpose is what keeps your words honest when lying would be easier. Purpose is what tells you to stand back up, not because you feel strong, but because the mission demands it. And the truth is, most people don't have purpose. They have ambition. They have drive. They have pressure. But they don't have purpose. And because of that, they build fast and shallow. They copy other people's moves. They chase status. They follow trends. They try to be everything to everyone. They move quickly but not deeply. They succeed in ways that look impressive on the outside but feel empty on the inside. Because without purpose, effort becomes a performance. Discipline becomes punishment. Growth becomes a game of endless comparison. You keep winning but you never feel whole. That's why purpose matters, not just as a motivational idea, but as a filtering system. Purpose tells you what to say yes to, what to walk away from, who to give your time to, how to navigate rejection, how to handle success. Without it, every decision becomes a negotiation. You lose hours wondering if you're doing the right thing. You lose weeks chasing things that don't matter. You lose yourself, because there's no core, no through line, no gravitational center that pulls you forward and grounds you when the world tries to twist you into shapes you were never meant to hold. And make no mistake, the world will try to bend you. It will offer shortcuts. It will offer applause. It will seduce you with safety and tempt you with distraction. If you don't have purpose, you'll start adapting to the environment instead of shaping it. You'll start becoming who people expect instead of who you're meant to be. And over time, the disconnect between your inner self and your outer behavior will make you resent the very life you built. Not because it wasn't successful, but because it wasn't true. So where does real purpose come from? It doesn't come from a brainstorming session. It doesn't come from copying someone else's blueprint. It comes from pain, from tension, from the questions that hurt to ask, from the wounds that refuse to heal because they're waiting for you to do something with them. Purpose is born the moment you stop looking for meaning and start choosing it. The moment you stop waiting for a lightning bolt and start taking responsibility for the gifts, the burdens, the rage, the hunger, the compassion, the stories that have followed you all your life. Think of the people who shaped history. They didn't do it out of comfort. They did it because something inside them became non-negotiable. Lincoln didn't just govern. He endured the moral weight of a divided nation because the Union meant more to him than approval. Disney didn't just create fantasy. He built worlds that restored wonder to a culture growing cynical. Carnegie didn't just build steel. He redefined what it meant to rise from nothing and then give it all away. These people weren't chasing trends. They were pulled by something stronger than circumstance. Their lives had direction, not because they never questioned themselves, but because they kept moving towards something bigger than ego. That's what purpose does. It pulls you forward when fear says stay. It says, you don't get to quit. This matters too much. It says, you don't get to pretend. People need what you carry. It says, you don't get to be small. That chapter is over. And if you actually listen to it, if you follow it through the resistance, through the confusion, through the seasons where nothing seems to work, it will reshape you. It will give your words weight. It will make your presence matter. People will feel the difference. Not because you're louder, but because your energy has direction. And in human nature, direction is everything. People instinctively trust those who know where they're going. They follow those who carry conviction, not because it's flashy, but because it's rare. We live in a world of wandering souls, people addicted to movement but allergic to meaning. That's why purpose stands out. That's why the person who moves with inner certainty is magnetic. Not because they're better, but because they've decided. They're not browsing life. They're building it. So if you've been drifting, if your goals feel empty, if your energy feels scattered, if your success feels disconnected, it's not because you're broken. It's because you haven't yet defined the why behind the what. And until you do, the effort will always outweigh the fulfillment. But the moment you do, the moment you lock in on a purpose that is yours, not borrowed, not forced, not pleasing, but true, everything changes. The noise fades. The fear loses volume. The confusion dissolves. Because now you're no longer reacting, you're responding. And that response shapes the direction of your life. Purpose doesn't make the path easier. It makes it clearer. It doesn't take away the weight. It gives you stronger hands to carry it. It doesn't eliminate struggle, it justifies it. And once you have that, once your life is grounded in something that transcends convenience, applause, and comfort, no one can take it from you. Because it's not a label. It's not a quote. It's not a brand. It's your reason for breathing. Chapter 6: The Weight of Discipline. Once purpose has been discovered, even if only partially, even if only in glimpses that flicker between days of doubt, there comes a moment when the clarity of the mission must be translated into the language the world understands: consistency. And that's where most people fall. Not because they aren't intelligent, not because they don't care, not because they lack desire, but because they never learned how to carry the weight of discipline. They confuse excitement with readiness. They confuse insight with action. And so they rise in bursts, intense, passionate, temporarily obsessed. But without structure, without rhythm, without roots. And anything without roots eventually topples, no matter how fast it grows. Discipline is not a punishment. It's not a burden to be endured for the sake of delayed rewards. It is the most profound expression of self-respect. It's the daily decision to act in alignment with who you say you are, even, especially, when you don't feel like it. It's what bridges the gap between intention and identity. Between the person you dream of becoming and the version of yourself that others actually experience. Because you are not what you say you'll do. You are what you repeat. Discipline turns promises into reality, vision into structure, potential into power. But here's the part no one tells you. Discipline doesn't start with scheduling apps, productivity hacks, or motivational quotes. It starts with truth. With confronting the uncomfortable reality that your current level of follow-through is not based on time, not based on circumstance, not based on motivation, but on integrity. If you don't follow through, it's not because life is hard. It's because you've made it negotiable. You've given yourself a backdoor. You've built habits of delay disguised as strategy. You've gotten used to the sound of your own rationalizations. And that is where discipline dies, not in failure, but in permission to fail quietly. Real discipline is cold. It doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't adjust to your mood. It's not poetic or romantic or inspiring. It is brutally reliable. It is silent. It is mundane. It is the version of you that shows up when no one is watching, when nothing is exciting, when the results aren't immediate. It is forged in the early mornings when your bed is warm and the world is asleep. In the late nights when fatigue begs for rest and the mission says, "One more." It is trained when you say yes to the hard thing without applause, without recognition, without drama, just because it's what needs to be done. That's the real test. Not how you act when you're inspired, but how you persist when you're not. Think of every person who's ever mastered anything. Real mastery, the kind that rewrites industries or shifts cultural consciousness. They weren't the most inspired. They were the most consistent. They showed up on the days when others made excuses. They rehearsed when others distracted themselves. They didn't wait for motivation. They built their own momentum. Carnegie didn't wake up driven every morning. Ford didn't smile through every setback. Edison didn't enjoy every failure. But they returned. Again and again. Because they knew that doing the work was the only path through the uncertainty. There is no shortcut. There is no hack. Just the slow, steady weight of discipline and the decision to carry it anyway. Discipline is how you become trustworthy, not just to others, but to yourself. It's how you rebuild your own credibility. Every time you say you'll do something and then do it, you reinforce the belief that you are someone who can be counted on. And that belief is everything. Because when your identity becomes tied to consistency, you no longer debate with your emotions. You no longer need to feel ready. You act because that's who you are. And when your actions align with that identity, momentum follows. Not all at once. Not with fireworks. But in quiet, compounding victories that eventually reshape your entire life. That's how confidence is built. Not by shouting affirmations into a mirror, but by doing difficult things repeatedly until your nervous system stops associating resistance with fear. You teach your body that discomfort is not danger. You teach your mind that fatigue is not failure. You normalize effort. You normalize execution. And suddenly, what once felt impossible becomes routine. Because the difference between the elite and the average is not talent, it's standards. High standards, maintained through discipline, not emotion. And this is where people confuse freedom with comfort. Real freedom does not come from escaping effort. It comes from owning it. From waking up and knowing exactly what needs to be done, and doing it. From removing the exhausting emotional negotiations that come with half commitments. From stepping into a life where your time is not dictated by impulse, but by intention. That's what discipline gives you. Freedom with structure. Spontaneity with purpose. Flow with form. And socially, psychologically, even spiritually, discipline is what separates the grounded from the scattered. It's why some people enter a room and instantly command presence, because you know they've done the work. You feel it in their posture, in their speech, in the way they don't rush to prove themselves. They're not trying to catch up to their potential, they're living inside it. They're not overwhelmed by options, they're anchored by purpose. Because they've disciplined their focus, their mind, their habits. Their lives are not an accident. They're an architecture. And yes, it's hard. It always will be. But the pain of discipline is nothing compared to the pain of regret. And that's the part people forget. You're going to suffer either way, either the controlled pain of progress or the chaotic pain of stagnation. One leads to power, the other to paralysis. Discipline is choosing your pain on purpose. Choosing it because it serves something greater. Choosing it because you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed everything to be easy. So decide, not once, but daily. Decide to keep the promises you make to yourself. Decide to stop performing and start producing. Decide to stop waiting and start building. Not perfectly, not loudly, but relentlessly. Because discipline, in the end, is not about the result. It's about the relationship you have with your own word. And that relationship, that trust, is the foundation of everything you'll ever build. Chapter 7. Action, the final currency of conviction. In a world drowning in overthinking, lost in loops of hesitation, paralyzed by the illusion of needing more time, more information, more permission, action has become rare. Not movement, there's plenty of frantic movement, but deliberate, grounded action, the kind that closes the gap between who you say you are and what the world actually sees. Because in the end, action is the final arbiter of truth. You can believe what you want, you can envision endlessly, you can plan until every detail is perfect, but if you're not moving, it doesn't matter. If you're not building, nothing is real. If you're not acting, you're not becoming. Action is the only proof that anything inside you is worth trusting. Most people live in a cycle of mental rehearsal. They think about what they would say, what they would build, how they would change, and that loop becomes addictive. Because inside your head, you never fail. Inside your imagination, you're already bold. You're already respected. You're already powerful. But the moment you step outside of thought and into movement, you enter a space where things can go wrong. You can be judged. You can be rejected. You can be misunderstood. And that's why most people never act, not because they don't know what to do, but because they can't tolerate the vulnerability of being seen trying. But here's what separates those who create from those who comment. Creators act. They act before they feel ready. They act without full certainty. They act when they're still afraid, still doubting, still unclear on the outcome. Because they understand that clarity does not come before action, it comes through it. You do not think your way into confidence. You act your way into identity. And every step you take is a vote for who you are. Not who you hope to be. Not who you pretend to be. But who you actually are, in motion, under pressure, in public and in pain. And you can't fake it. Because life responds to action, not intention. You can intend to be disciplined, but if you hit snooze again, the result is still the same. You can intend to tell the truth, but if you stay silent, no one benefits. You can intend to build a legacy, but if you keep postponing the work, your potential rots in theory. That's the brutal law. The universe does not reward what you intend. It rewards what you initiate. Action is the tax you pay to prove that you mean it. The danger of inaction is that it builds identity just as powerfully as execution does, only in the wrong direction. Every time you avoid the call, delay the conversation, ignore the opportunity, say, "Not yet," or "Maybe later," you are training yourself to believe that your voice doesn't matter, that your ideas are not ready, that your fears are worth more than your future. And over time, those micro-decisions calcify. They become who you are. Not by design, but by default. You want to shift your life? Then stop negotiating with hesitation. Stop worshiping potential. Stop building castles inside your mind that no one will ever see. Stop fearing failure more than you fear regret. Because failure is feedback. Painful, yes, but clean, honest, useful. Regret is poison. Slow, quiet, and irreversible. And while failure can shape you, regret will haunt you. It will whisper in moments of silence, reminding you not of what you did, but of what you could have done. What you should have done. What you still could do, if only you'd move. And the irony is, the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to act. Not because the task changes, but because you do. Every moment you delay, the image of yourself as someone who delays gets stronger. And eventually, you're no longer a person who's hesitating, you're someone who hesitates. It becomes identity. But the moment you act, even imperfectly, even clumsily, even with fear in your chest and your hands shaking, you begin to rewrite the story. Because action has a strange power. It shifts not just the world, but your sense of self. You start to believe you're capable, not because you feel it, but because you did it. That's the hidden truth most people never realize. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It is a byproduct of it. You don't become confident by sitting still. You become confident by acting in the presence of fear and surviving it. You speak, and your voice doesn't crack as badly as you thought. You try, and the world doesn't collapse. You take the leap, and even if you land awkwardly, you landed. And that reference point is everything. Because once you've done it once, you can do it again. And again. And again. until the fear that once controlled you becomes background noise. Still there, but no longer in charge. And this applies to everything. Relationships, careers, creativity, leadership. Every category of life is shaped by action. What you build, what you walk away from, what you pursue, what you say in that moment where silence would be easier. These decisions add up. They don't just shape your results, they shape your reputation. And not your reputation with others, your reputation with yourself. Do you trust your own word? Do you follow through when no one's watching? Do you have the courage to move when it matters? Because ultimately, the person you become is defined by what you consistently do. Not what you feel. Not what you plan. Not what you dream. Action is the bridge. It's what takes the internal and makes it external. It's what brings ideas into form, values into impact, and intention into legacy. And legacy isn't something you leave behind when you die. It's something you build while you live. And the only tool you'll ever use to build it is movement. So stop waiting to be fearless. That moment may never come. Instead, act in spite of it. Speak through the shaking. Lead while you're still learning. Move while you're still unsure. Because motion beats meditation. Execution beats theory. Done beats perfect. And the one who acts will always outpace the one who plans. In the end, action is the only language the future understands. Chapter 8. The Precision of Gratitude. There is a kind of power that doesn't announce itself with thunder or spectacle, that doesn't scream for attention or demand recognition. A power so understated that many mistake it for softness, for weakness, for passivity, and overlook it entirely. But gratitude, real gratitude, not the performance of appreciation, not the empty thank you before rushing to the next high, not the public display of modesty camouflaging quiet entitlement. Real gratitude is sharp. It is not a warm, vague feeling. It is a discipline of perception, a strategic state of awareness, an intentional lens through which high performers, grounded leaders, and emotionally evolved individuals navigate chaos without becoming it. Because gratitude is not just about what you feel. It's about what you see, and how accurately you are willing to see it. Gratitude does not deny pain. It does not sugarcoat suffering. It does not pretend everything is okay. It simply refuses to let the negative blind you to what is also true. That you have power. That you have agency. That you have survived things others never recovered from. That you are breathing in a body that still moves, still fights, still carries a mind capable of evolution and redirection, no matter what the story has been up until now. Gratitude is the voice in your head that says, yes, this is hard, but it's not over. Yes, I've lost things, but I've kept things too. Yes, I've been hurt, but I've learned. It is a recentering of emotional gravity. A refusal to let your vision collapse into despair. Because here's what most people don't realize. Pain narrows your focus. It shrinks your perception until all you can see is the failure, the betrayal, the thing you lost, the thing you feared, the thing that didn't work. And if you don't interrupt that loop, it becomes your worldview. It becomes your identity. It becomes your explanation for why you're stuck. But gratitude expands you. It opens the frame. It pulls your head above the fog and forces you to admit that yes, there was loss, but there was also gain. Yes, things broke, but you didn't. You're still here. And if you're still here, you're not done. Gratitude gives you perspective in the storm. It gives you distance from your emotion without detachment from your reality. It allows you to say, I'm angry, but I'm not blind. I'm tired, but I'm not quitting. I'm in pain, but I still see purpose. And in that clarity, you find options. You find strength. You find reasons to continue. That's why gratitude isn't a luxury. It's survival. It's a tactical advantage. It's how you avoid the slow corrosion of bitterness that ruins brilliant minds. It's how you stay mentally agile in a world that profits from your outrage and despair. It's how you prevent pain from mutating into personality. Because bitterness is what happens when pain gets rehearsed. When the wound becomes your worldview. When the story of what you didn't get becomes your entire identity. And that's a slow death. Not just of joy, but of perception, of presence, of possibility. But gratitude interrupts that spiral. It keeps you from becoming hardened. It keeps you curious. It keeps you human. And human is where the power is, not robotic, not indifferent, not emotionally detached, but grounded in reality, aware of what hurts and what heals, able to tell the difference, and strong enough to choose what serves you. And yes, gratitude is a choice. Not a natural default for most. It must be trained. Because the mind is built for survival, and survival is fueled by threat detection, not appreciation. Your nervous system is wired to notice what's missing, what's dangerous, what could go wrong, not what's already here, what's working, what's still intact. So if you don't override that system, you will walk through blessings like they're burdens. You will adapt so quickly to progress that you forget what it cost you to earn it. You will begin to see abundance as background noise, and your ambition, if not grounded in gratitude, will turn into entitlement. And entitled ambition is dangerous. It never feels like enough. It consumes but never fulfills. It wins but cannot receive the win. Gratitude realigns you. It slows you down without making you soft. It brings your attention back to what's true now, not just what could be next. It lets you drive hard toward the future while still remaining connected to the miracle that you're even in the game at all. That you woke up. That you get to try. That you get to fail forward, to build again, to speak, to lead, to matter. Gratitude reframes suffering as part of the sculpture. It doesn't glorify pain, but it acknowledges that your most sacred strength was forged inside it. And when people feel that in you, when they sense that your ambition isn't frantic, that it's rooted, that your progress doesn't come at the cost of presence, that your voice isn't bitter but still carries fire, they trust you. Because they know you're not just chasing outcomes. You've earned perspective. And in human nature, perspective is rare. People are drawn to it because it feels like home. Like something deeper than branding. Something real. So train your perception. Cultivate the discipline of appreciation, not in the shallow sense, not in the curated highlights, but in the hard-earned awareness that every breath, every lesson, every scar has its place. That what didn't work taught you what matters. That what left you made room for what's coming. That what humbled you brought wisdom that couldn't be bought, only lived. Gratitude doesn't mean everything is okay. It means you're okay, even when everything isn't. And that's a power the world can't shake. Because when you are grateful, truly, structurally, consistently, you are dangerous. You don't crumble at hardship. You don't drown in desire. You don't forget how far you've come. You build faster. You lead clearer. You live with both hands open, grounded in truth, ready for more, but never empty. Chapter 9. Adaptability, the mastery of motion. The world you live in today is not the one you were born into. The rules have shifted, the speed has increased, the narratives that once promised stability have decayed in front of you, and the institutions you were told to trust now shake under their own weight. Change is not coming. It's already here. It's already underneath you, moving fast, indifferent to your resistance. And in this new reality, intelligence is no longer defined by how much you know, but by how quickly you can adjust. The highest form of strength is not rigidity, not unshakable conviction, not the illusion of control. It is adaptability. The capacity to reorient yourself in the face of volatility without losing your core. Adaptability is not compromise. It is not weakness. It is not passive acceptance of everything that happens to you. It is a form of strategic evolution, the ability to recalibrate your direction without abandoning your identity, to navigate chaos without becoming disoriented by it. Most people break when their plans break because they confuse structure with purpose. They think the way they've always done it is who they are. And when life demands a new strategy, they panic. They fight the current. They mourn the map. And in doing so, they lose the most valuable thing they had, momentum. But adaptability understands something deeper, that your ability to thrive is directly tied to how fast you can let go of what no longer works. Not emotionally, not after the fact, but while it's breaking, while it's shifting, while everyone else is waiting for clarity or certainty or permission, the adaptable mind is already scanning, recalibrating, and moving forward. Not out of panic, not out of fear, but out of deep alignment with the truth that nothing stays the same, Not markets, not relationships, not seasons of life, not even you. And those who demand permanence in a temporary world are not stable, they are fragile. That's the paradox. The more you cling to stability, the less of it you actually experience. Because real stability is not the absence of change, it's the ability to pivot through it without losing yourself. It's the internal flexibility to remain whole even when the world around you is dissolving. And this is not something you're born with. It's a skill. It's a muscle. And you build it every time you face something unfamiliar and respond with curiosity instead of fear. Every time you fail and don't collapse into shame. Every time you're humbled by reality and choose to listen rather than defend the old narrative. Adaptability means you're not married to form, you're committed to function. You're not here to protect the method, you're here to fulfill the mission. And if the mission requires reinvention, you do it. Even if it costs you comfort. Even if it costs you pride. Even if it means letting go of a version of yourself that once worked but now weighs you down. Because you understand that in the game of human nature, those who survive the longest are not the most talented or the most connected. They are the ones who can evolve in real time. You see this in every industry. Every movement. Every moment of crisis. The ones who adapt rise while everyone else freezes. The ones who can pivot, in business, in leadership, in communication, in personal identity, they become the stabilizers for everyone else. Because most people wait too long. They stay in jobs they've outgrown. They hold onto strategies that don't scale. They cling to worldviews that stopped working 5 years ago. Not because they're stupid, but because their identity is tangled in their previous methods. And if you don't separate your sense of self from your current strategy, you will go down with it when it fails. This is the brutal truth. If you don't evolve, you don't stay still, you fall behind. You drift into irrelevance. You become a relic, a monument to who you used to be, while the world moves on without you. But if you learn to let go quickly, to listen deeply, to update your systems as life changes, you become something rare. You become resilient not just emotionally, but operationally. You become a force that can absorb failure, absorb feedback, absorb complexity, and continue to build. And that building doesn't just apply to systems or goals or achievements, it applies to you. Because adaptability is ultimately about identity. It's about being able to say, who I was last year served me well, but I am no longer that person. Who I was last month got me this far, but now I need to shift. Who I thought I needed to be is less important than who I actually am, right now, in this new environment. It's a mindset of continuous calibration. Not chasing change, but responding to it wisely. Not being tossed around by every trend, but having the discernment to know when to evolve, and how far. That's what makes true adaptability powerful. It is not reactive, it is responsive. It's not the panicked scramble to change for the sake of survival. It's the calculated movement of someone who understands that nothing is guaranteed, and therefore, everything must be examined constantly. The way you lead, the way you think, the way you communicate, the way you move through the world. Everything that doesn't align with where you're going must be refined or released. Because if you don't adapt, your mission will outgrow your methods, and you'll become the bottleneck to your own evolution. But the moment you embrace this truth, really embrace it, not just intellectually but emotionally, you stop fearing change. You start leaning into it. You stop protecting obsolete systems and start building resilient ones. You stop needing things to stay the same and start trusting yourself to navigate the shift. And that's when people notice. That's when leadership becomes real. Because anyone can lead when things are stable. Anyone can look composed when everything is predictable. But when the rules change, when the plan breaks, when reality deviates from expectation, it's the adaptable who rise, who redirect, who reframe and continue without losing clarity or momentum. Adaptability doesn't just make you functional. It makes you formidable. Because you're not tied to comfort. You're not trapped by tradition. You're not a slave to your past success. You are fluid, focused, responsive, and in a world defined by constant, relentless change that makes you unstoppable. Chapter 10. Resilience, the quiet violence of refusal. There are moments in life that fracture you, Moments that split the illusion you've constructed about safety, control, direction. You receive the call that shatters your plans. You lose the thing you thought you couldn't live without. You face betrayal from someone you trusted blindly. The business collapses. The project dies. The years of effort yield silence. And in those moments, something inside you begins to recalibrate, not with clarity, not with peace, but with pain so sharp it strips away everything performative and leaves you staring at the raw, exposed truth of who you are without the mask of momentum. And in that space, a single question forms, quiet but absolute. Will you stay down? Or will you rise differently? Resilience is not the act of bouncing back. That's too simplistic, too sanitized, too mechanical. True resilience is not recovery. It is reinvention. It is what happens when the identity you built around success gets crushed under the weight of reality, and instead of collapsing entirely, you begin constructing something deeper. Not to prove anything. Not to impress anyone. But because the mission isn't done yet. Because some small, defiant part of you refuses to let the loss be the end of the story. Resilience is refusal. The refusal to let temporary defeat become permanent identity. And that kind of strength can't be faked. It can't be outsourced. It can't be read in books or copied from mentors. It is earned, one scar at a time. You earn it in the sleepless nights where no strategy seems to work. You earn it in the meetings where you are misunderstood and still choose to speak. You earn it in the months where growth stalls, progress reverses, and all the momentum you built evaporates. You earn it when every voice in your head says, it's too late, it's too broken, you're too tired, and you still move. Not heroically. Not perfectly. Just deliberately. That's what separates the resilient. They move through the ruins. And over time, they build again. And this matters because the world doesn't reward the first attempt. It rewards the final one that worked. The product people use. The book that gets published. The message that lands. And what people forget is that every final version they celebrate was preceded by dozens of failures they never saw. Edison's light bulb wasn't brilliance, it was persistence. Lincoln's leadership wasn't charisma, it was resilience refined by personal tragedy and political humiliation. Oprah wasn't born magnetic, she endured rejection, trauma, and discrimination and turned it into fuel. Every story of success that feels impossible from the outside is made of thousands of internal decisions to continue when most would not. That's why resilience is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It doesn't post every step. It doesn't perform strength, because it knows it. And in human nature, that kind of energy is undeniable. You can feel it in someone who has been broken but not defeated. In the way they speak without needing validation. In the way they don't rush to prove they've healed, they simply carry on. There's something heavier in their silence. Something grounded. Not invulnerable but unchained from fear. Because once you've survived collapse, the opinions of fragile people no longer register as real threats. But let's be clear, resilience is not numbness. It's not a hardened indifference. It's not pretending pain doesn't touch you. On the contrary, resilient people feel deeply. They just don't stay broken. They don't let the pain become permanent personality. They grieve, they process, they adapt, and then they re-engage. Because they understand that life doesn't pause to honor your trauma. It keeps moving. And you must decide whether to stay in the narrative of what happened, or step into the authorship of what comes next. This is the brutal gift of suffering. It reveals to you who you were never meant to be. The parts of you that were built for performance, for approval, for convenience, they don't survive real loss. And that's good. Because what's left is real. What's left is the raw material of a new foundation, not built on perfection, but on truth. Not designed to avoid pain, but to withstand it. And from that, a new form of strength emerges, the kind that can't be shaken by failure, because it no longer expects ease. The kind that doesn't need things to go right, because it's already prepared to endure when they don't. And socially, resilience gives you gravity. People trust you not because you're flawless, but because you've returned. Because you're still standing. Because you don't flinch when things fall apart. You become someone people anchor to in chaos, not because you have all the answers, but because you've proven you won't abandon yourself when the structure collapses. In a world built on shortcuts and scripted confidence, that kind of steadiness feels sacred. And it's not built in the spotlight. It's built after the fall, in silence, in the rebuilding no one celebrates. So if you are in the middle of your breaking, if everything feels fragile, if nothing is working, if the path you trusted just fell apart, know this: you are not lost. You are being forged. You are not late. You are becoming. And the pain you feel right now is not the end. It is the cost of depth, the price of evolution, the necessary disruption required to tear down the parts of you that cannot hold the next level of who you must become. Do not rush it. Do not romanticize it. And do not stop. Keep moving, even if it's slow. Even if you doubt. Even if you're scared. Because the ones who keep moving, they become unbreakable. Not because they never fall, but because they no longer fear the fall. Chapter 11. Learning, the discipline of becoming. There is no final version of you. No completed state. No ultimate arrival point where growth ends and you are declared finished. That illusion, that myth of completion, has destroyed more potential than failure ever could. Because the moment you begin to believe that you've become, you stop becoming. You stop asking questions. You stop listening to what challenges your assumptions. You stop exposing yourself to difficulty, because comfort now masquerades as identity, and anything that threatens that comfort feels like danger. But the ones who endure, the ones who remain powerful across decades, across industries, across eras, they are not the ones who knew the most. They are the ones who kept learning. Learning is not school. It's not certificates. It's not watching content or reading quotes or collecting data for the sake of feeling busy. Learning is not passive absorption. It's active integration. It's the uncomfortable, relentless process of interrogating your own patterns, dissecting your failures without defensiveness, pulling your ego out of the room long enough to see clearly. Real learning is violent in its honesty. It does not flatter you. It does not stroke your potential. It shows you, with precision, where you are still small, where you are still blind, where you are still rehearsing outdated methods that serve the old version of you but are now quietly sabotaging the new one. Most people don't learn. They accumulate. They gather knowledge but never sharpen it. They can repeat ideas but they don't live them. They attend seminars, read books, listen to experts, nod along, and still behave the same way they did 5 years ago. Because they haven't learned. Because real learning isn't knowing what to do. It's doing it consistently enough to make it instinct. And instinct is what separates information from identity. You don't rise in life because of what you know. You rise because of what you embody. And that embodiment comes only through friction. You learn through mistakes. Through uncomfortable feedback. Through exposure to people smarter than you. Through risking the embarrassment of being wrong in public again and again, until truth becomes more important than pride. That's why most people plateau, not because they've reached their ceiling but because they've reached their tolerance for discomfort. They stop growing when the lessons stop flattering them. And in doing so, they choose stagnation over transformation. But not you. Not if you're serious. Because learning, if you truly understand what it means, is the discipline of becoming. It's the mindset of the master, not the one who needs to be seen as the expert, but the one who refuses to stop evolving. It's what made Da Vinci insatiably curious until his last breath. It's what drove Carnegie to not only build an empire but spend his later years in libraries learning how to give it away intelligently. It's what made Disney reinvent his own studio after success. It's what made Jobs rebuild Apple from the ashes, not by repeating his former methods but by studying what had changed, in technology, in people, in himself. That's the power of real learning. It doesn't just change what you know, it changes how you think. It rewires your patterns. It makes you less reactive, more strategic. Less rigid, more observant. You start to see failure not as punishment, but as precision data. You stop taking offense to feedback, because you crave the edge that only critique can give. You become harder to manipulate, because you know what you don't know, and that awareness is armor. You become more calm in complexity, because complexity is just unfamiliar simplicity, waiting to be understood, and you know how to understand. You've trained for it. And this applies in every arena of human nature. In conversation, in leadership, in relationships, in strategy. People who don't learn become trapped in loops. They date the same kind of person and wonder why it always ends the same. They lead the same way and wonder why morale keeps falling. They sell the same way and wonder why the market stopped listening. Because they stopped listening first. But those who learn stay dangerous. They adapt their delivery. They refine their perception. They update their emotional codebase. And the longer they learn, the more unstoppable they become, not because they know everything, but because they are addicted to learning anything. Learning also requires humility. And this is where many high achievers collapse. Because the higher they rise, the more fragile their ego becomes. The more they need to protect the appearance of knowing. But the truth is, if you need to look smart, you'll never become wise. Wisdom is not a product of certainty. It's a byproduct of questions. Constant questions. Relentless curiosity. The humility to admit that just because something worked yesterday doesn't mean it will work tomorrow. That your talent is real, but your blind spots are also real. And if you don't see them, they'll shape your life in ways you'll blame on others. So ask better questions. Put yourself in uncomfortable rooms. Study people who challenge you. Break the loop of self-confirmation. Learn from those you disagree with. Learn from those who failed publicly. Learn from your enemies. Learn from the silence after your mistake. Learn from your emotional triggers. Learn from the parts of your story that you still refuse to look at. Because that's where your evolution lives. Not in the comfortable truths, but in the inconvenient ones. And finally, learning is useless if it doesn't become application. If you don't move differently after the lesson, you didn't learn. If you don't speak more precisely, lead more calmly, respond more intelligently, you didn't grow. You just consumed. And in a world obsessed with input, the ones who rise are those who convert knowledge into motion. Not once. Not sporadically. But relentlessly. With humility. With discipline. With an unshakable belief that the version of you today is not the final product, just the current draft of something greater. Because you don't rise by knowing more. You rise by learning faster. And learning faster means surrendering slower. Chapter 12. Legacy, the shadow you leave behind. At the end of it all, after the momentum fades, after the titles are stripped, after the applause becomes quiet and the spotlight moves to someone else, there will remain only one thing. The effect you had on other people's reality. That is your legacy. Not your name carved into glass. Not your follower count, your trophies, your accolades, or your curated life resume. But the ripple of your existence in the minds, the hearts, the direction of other human beings, many of whom may never even say your name out loud, but whose trajectory changed, whose thinking shifted, whose inner voice recalibrated because you existed. And whether you intended it or not, whether you chose to acknowledge it or ignore it, you are already building that legacy, right now, with every conversation, every decision, every room you walk into, and every soul you leave affected. Legacy is not what happens after you die. That's too late. Legacy is the footprint you leave on people while you're still breathing. It is shaped in how you show up when no one is keeping score. It is formed by how you make others feel when you have nothing to gain. It is measured in the emotional residue of your presence, the quiet echoes of your standards, your principles, your discipline, your generosity, your clarity. People may forget the exact things you said, but they never forget how you made them feel about themselves. Legacy lives there, in that intangible energy that follows your name like a shadow you never see, but everyone else walks through. And here's the part that too many people miss. Legacy is not something you can script or perform into existence. You don't get to decide how the world remembers you based on intention. You shape it through action. You sculpt it in real time by the quality of your character, the precision of your word, the consistency of your example. Every decision you make is a thread in that fabric. Every reaction, every moment of leadership or silence, every time you choose courage over comfort, presence over distraction, purpose over noise, you're teaching people something about what it means to live with depth. And over time, that becomes your echo. But this requires one thing above all else, a willingness to live with the long game in mind. Because legacy doesn't reward urgency. It doesn't applaud busyness. It doesn't care how many things you chased if nothing you touched was transformed. It asks instead, what did you make better? Not bigger. Better. What did you leave stronger than you found it? Whose potential did you unlock? Whose story did you rewrite by how you believed in them, challenged them, supported them, held them to a higher standard? How many rooms were elevated not by your voice, but by your presence alone? Because you embodied something real, something consistent, something grounded. The world is not shaped by people who shouted the loudest. It is shaped by those whose principles outlived their personality. Lincoln didn't live for legacy, he lived by conviction. And it cost him everything, including his life. But the world changed because he showed up for history the way most only show up for performance. Viktor Frankl didn't theorize meaning from a distance. He carved it out in a concentration camp where death was routine and dignity was a choice, and his legacy is not the book he wrote, but the lens he gave humanity to suffer without losing soul. That is legacy, not frozen statues, but frameworks people use to find their strength long after your time has ended. And the truth is, most people will never get public credit for their legacy. And that's the point. Because real legacy is not ego-driven, it's soul-driven. It's not about being known. It's about being felt. It's not about going viral. It's about being vital in someone's moment of chaos, someone's chapter of doubt, someone's turning point where they remember your voice not because you demanded attention, but because you gave it. Not because you led them, but because you saw them. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present. Legacy lives in the spaces you forgot to record. In the long conversations no one filmed. In the gesture that interrupted someone's spiral. In the decision to hold the line when it would have been easier to bend. In the risks you took that no one applauded, because they were too busy watching the wrong things. In the way you taught your children not with advice, but with your daily presence. In how you treated people when your name held no leverage. In the unmarketable, unmonetized, uncomfortable decisions to do the right thing, especially when it slowed you down. And here's the hard truth. Legacy doesn't always feel good. Because often, it means saying no to things that glitter, things that feed your ego in the short term but sabotage your contribution in the long run. It means turning down comfort so you can leave behind clarity. It means sacrificing speed in exchange for substance. It means being okay with not being understood right now, because the value of what you're building is too nuanced, too deep, too future-facing for the moment to recognize. But time always tells the truth. Time always elevates the authentic. Time always reveals who was building for real. And the ones who were, they're remembered not for their performance, but for their effect. So ask yourself, honestly, what are you building that will outlast you? Not in name, not in credit, but in impact? What values are you living with such consistency that they will echo into the lives of people you've never even met? What work are you doing now that your great-grandchildren will benefit from, not in luxury, but in awareness? What do you stand for that others will lean on when they forget who they are? Because legacy is not the house. It's the foundation. It's the invisible structure beneath the success, the reason people feel stronger just by being around you. It's not what you leave behind when you die. It's what others carry forward because you lived. So don't chase legacy. Live it. With clarity. With courage. With conviction. Right now. In real time.